All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Nathan Smith, and I'm the Digital Programming Coordinator here at the Central Arkansas Library System. Thanks so much for joining me for Microsoft Excel Part 4, Pivot Tables, Pivot Charts, and Lookup. I think you're going to learn a lot of cool stuff today, and I'm excited to show it to you. So glad you're here. Before we dive in, as always, there are some quick little preliminary things to take care of. First of all, if you, we've always got tons of cool stuff going on here at the Central Arkansas Library System, particularly in the realm of virtual programming. So if you want to know what else is coming up, take a look. Just head to cals.org head to cals.org, move your mouse over events, and click on find an event online, and you should see all of that stuff arrayed before you. And we are gearing up at the end of next month in October for the annual Six Bridges Book Festival. Very excited about that. I'm going to be working on a lot of logistics and technical type things for that event. And we're going to have tons of great authors. And so please come join us for that. Super exciting. And it's all virtual, so super easy to get there. The other big thing that I want to say is, as always, if you have questions, please speak up and let me know. Don't worry about if your question feels like it might be sort of a silly one, or if you think it might be something that's obvious to me or to other people who are a little more tech savvy. Don't worry about that. The point of a technology class, of course, is for you to learn about technology. So if you're learning useful things about technology, then class is going great. If you are confused by what I'm saying and it's kind of going in one ear and out the other, then things are not going so great. So I would much prefer you ask a question that you worry might be a little bit silly and those sorts of things, rather than that you sit in silence and don't get the information that you need to understand what's going on. I want everybody to be able to follow along with what we're doing here in the class. So ask those questions when you have them. But how do you ask those questions? Well, let me tell you. Down at the bottom of the screen, if you're joining me here in Zoom, you should see a little speech bubble that says chat right underneath it. In fact, I just sent a link to the chat a moment ago where you can find the example file in the handout. If you haven't already gotten that, you can click on that and download those. Down at the bottom, click on that little speech bubble that says chat and type in your question, and I will see it and be able to respond. So that's how you do it in Zoom, at least if you're on a computer. If you're on a mobile device using the Zoom app, what you want to do is look in the corners and or tap in the middle of the screen, look in the corner. You should see a button that says More. Tap on that More button, and you should see chat in the menu there. Tap on that, and you should get the chat box where you can type in your question and send it to me. Fantastic. If you are joining me via one of the live streams on Facebook, what you'll want to do is just look in the comments below this video and put your question in the comments, just like you would on any other post on all of Facebook. Pretty easy. And if you're joining me on YouTube, what you'll want to do is look out to the side if you're on a computer, or down below if you're on a mobile device, for the live chat area and type your questions in there. So that's pretty much it. Like I said, if you have questions, let me know at any point. Also, if there are technical problems at any point, if my mic goes out, if my screen sharing freezes up, if you lose my camera and I haven't said I'm going to turn my camera off for a sec, then in all of those situations, please let me know about that too, because I want to make sure that you're able to follow along, and that we don't waste a bunch of time where I'm talking into a muted microphone or things like that. That's usually not great. Okay, so here we go. Let's go ahead and dive in. Let me actually go ahead and pop that link into the chat and comments on Facebook and YouTube as well, so that way folks who are there can follow along too. You should find a handout there at that link. It's cals.link/excel-4-files. If you click on that, you should be able to find the example file with the examples that we're going to be going through today. And you should be able to find a handout, which is your little cheat sheet for the stuff that we're going to be talking about today. So grab that if you want. If you want to just watch and try it again later, you're welcome to. Cal's YouTube channel is going to have the replay of this, so you can go in and watch it later. If you want to circle back again and practice along. And so yeah, okay, let's do this thing. I'm going to fire up the screen sharing. There we go. All right, there's my Excel window. And first thing that I need to do while I'm thinking about it is I'm going to need to come up here and click on Enable Editing. Microsoft puts that little thing in place so that if you're downloading a file from a source that you don't trust, then you can avoid any major problems. But you should be fine. I'm using the exact same file that y'all are, so no worries there. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start out by talking about, well, actually, let me give you a little overview of what we're going to be doing today. So today we're going to be talking about 3 topics that are listed in the name of the class. Okay, anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk first about just tables. Those are pretty important. Let's see, here we go. Yeah, let me get that a little bigger for you there. No problem. Thanks for that. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about tables, which are somewhat different from pivot tables, which we'll be talking about shortly. We're going to start out by talking about tables. They're pretty useful, and it leads nicely into talking about pivot tables specifically. Next, we're going to talk about pivot tables. Pivot tables are a way to kind of change the way you're seeing your data and sort of find patterns and commonalities and just additional information that you can get by analyzing your data in different ways. It's pretty cool, pretty useful. So we'll dig into that. Next thing that we'll be doing after that is we're going to look just briefly at PivotCharts, which are essentially just charts made out of pivot table information, and we'll dig into that a little more as we move forward. And finally, we're going to talk about using lookup, specifically the Vlookup function in formulas, which allows you to have Excel look up information for you. All right, so let's start out with tables. So in Excel, if you the first sheet that I've got here in my example file, I've got 2 lists here. I've got a list of Marvel movies and a list of Star Wars movies. And the reason I have this set up this way, of course, both lists have the same column headings, right? So title, release date, director, and writer. But obviously there are 2 different sets of data. Let's say that for some reason we want them all on one sheet here so that it's easy to see them all together, but we don't want them to get mixed up. And we also want to be able to kind of sort through them and do things like alphabetize or sort by dates or things like that. So to be able to do that, what we want to do is we want to put both of these sets of lists in a table. Before I do that, though, I want to show you what could happen if we don't. You don't necessarily have to follow me on this part. You can just kind of watch this for a sec. And then we will we'll be able to, and then I'll let you know when it's time to follow along again. It could get a little confusing if you actually do this along with me. So just hang out for a sec. Okay. So if you remember in part 1 a few weeks ago, we used that sort and filter feature to sort out all of our data, right? So I come up here to the top on the home tab, click on sort and filter, and I click filter. And it gives me the little drop down arrows next to each of the header, inside each of the header cells, title, release date, director, writer. But if I do this, there's a problem. Check it out. I'll hit the little drop down arrow next to release date, and I'll click sort oldest to newest. Now, suddenly, the movies are all mixed up. We've got a problem here. And also we have a row down here at the bottom that says title, release date, director, and writer. Since release date is not a date, when we sorted it from oldest to newest, that got put at the last since it kind of doesn't fit. And so we've got a problem here. Our data sets have been mixed up. The reason for that, I'll hit the undo button, is because when I listed this out, you'll notice that for one, these are right next to each other. So this one is right underneath the other. And for another, the data that we have here is pretty, well, obviously it's very similar. They're very similar types of data. So we want these to be listed exactly like this, but we want to keep them separate from each other. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to come up here to the top, click and hold in cell A1 where the title header is, and come down here to the bottom until I get cell D24 in the mix. So I've got all of these selected. Then I'm going to come up here to the top and I'm going to click on Format as Table right here. And you've got a whole bunch of different options here of different looks you could use. I'm going to go with the screen this time. And all this is just they're just, all of those options that I just had that I was choosing between, those are all strictly stylistic. The functionality of your table is going to be exactly the same no matter which of those style options you choose. So you don't have to worry so much about the function of it. The bigger thing to think about is basically just whether it looks nice to you or not. So that's nice. Okay, so when I click that button, I get this, or when I make a selection there of a particular style, I get this Create Table dialog box. It says, where's the data for your table? And it gives me, again, these are absolute references like we've talked about previously, $A, $1. That's cell A1, an absolute reference to that cell, meaning if it's moved around, if things are shifted around, that shouldn't change. The top left corner of this table should still be cell A1. And then over here, $D, $24. So that's cell D24. And again, an absolute reference. And then I've got a checkbox that says my table has headers, and yes, it does. So I'm going to click OK. Okay, it says, oh, okay, it's giving me an error message. I haven't done that little demo of actually mixing up the data before, so I guess that's why. No worries. Let's see. I'm going to come up here and undo where it says sort and filter. All right, so now we can actually do this. Go ahead and select cells A1 to D24. Come up here to the top, click on click on Format as Table, select a style, and make sure that my table has headers is checked, and then click OK. There we go. Okay, so now we have our table style here. This is not exactly the kind of style I want. Let's see, let me look and make it slightly different here. This is better. Okay, I'm going to go with this one. Green table style, medium 14. Again, you can choose whichever one appeals to you. Does not matter. It's whatever you like. Okay, so now we've got our table here, and you can tell, of course, because of the changes in the colors here. So we've got our with this particular style, my header row is the cells are filled in dark green or pretty I don't know, at least medium green on the top row, and the text is white and bold. And then down here, we have what are called banded rows, where the color of the rows alternates. And so we've got a somewhat darker green here, somewhat lighter green here, somewhat darker, somewhat lighter, all the way down. And of course, that makes it easier to see which thing is on which row, which is obviously super duper handy. So we've got this all. So we've got it kind of looking nicer, and it's a little bit more readable. It's easier to see what's on what row, and excuse me, which movie titles go with which dates and all of that stuff. So we've got that set up. Now what we need to do is we've got our now let me try sorting it again. And actually these are already sorted, so it's not going to change that much, if at all. Okay, yep. If I go oldest to newest, sure enough, there it is. No change. Let's just go newest to oldest. Again, no change. I didn't get the other movies mixed up with these. It's all working together just fine. If I go over here, I can sort alphabetically by title and so on and so forth. Great. That seems to be working. And it's keeping that data separate from this. Now, of course, this data, if I'm going to add any additional stuff or just to make things a little more consistent, probably going to select that. Format as table, and I'll put a blue one this time. There we go. Okay, great. So now I have two separate tables here. And the key thing to remember about these tables, they do a bunch of different things. So you'll notice if I scroll down, I don't know why it's not doing it up at the top. Oh, because I'm not my cursor, or I haven't selected the cell in there. If you have a cell inside of your table selected and you scroll down, you'll notice your column letters get replaced by the column headers on the top row of the table. So I've got instead of A, B, C, and D up here, I actually have title, release date, director, and writer. So if I've got a table with a lot of information in it and I need to scroll down a ways, this will help me keep my columns straight, particularly if they contain similar types of information. Like if I have, if I have several different dates, or if I have numbers for, monthly numbers for a whole year or something like that, that'll help me identify more quickly exactly which column I'm looking at. And that's very convenient. And the table kind of functions as a sheet unto itself. So when I'm sorting and filtering and stuff like that, then it's all of that's going to stay inside of the table that I'm working in. It also serves as just kind of a visual, gives you some nice visual cues. So you can, if you are, so particularly if you're printing, this can be really helpful. The banded rows make it a lot easier to see what's on which row and so forth, and not get lost, basically. So that can be really handy. And then well, you have a whole lot of other stuff that you can do. For example, things like if you include a formula in a table, it'll automatically duplicate to subsequent rows because a table is assumed to, that each row will have all the data, will have the data that will have data that's similarly formatted. And you can also include what's called a total row. When I did that, it actually pushed it down a little bit. And right now what it's doing is just counting the number of rows that have stuff in them. But you can change it to include an average of something, account the sum of a bunch of different, of a bunch of different numbers, all sorts of things like that. So tables are really convenient for doing a whole bunch of stuff. And particularly if you need a set of data that's kind of unto itself, that's meant to be separate from whatever else is inside your sheet, tables are really, really your friend there. Okay, cool. So that's most of the stuff about tables. There are other things to talk about. If you, okay, yeah. So good question from someone. I did not call this out specifically, which I normally do. So I'm glad you did. So it says the table design on your top row of the tools, is that hidden or conditional? My top row ends with the word help. Good question. So up here at the top, of course, we talked about, back in part 1, we have the ribbon, these little tabs up here at the top. When you click on them, you switch to different sets of tools, right? So when you're working inside of a table, when you have a cell inside of a table selected, then you get this table design tab here, or in some versions of Excel, it's listed as something like the table tools design tab. And that only shows up if you have a cell inside of a table selected. So if I click out here into cell E3, you'll notice it's gone now. Help is the last one, just like you mentioned, you were seeing on your screen. When I click inside of the table, then I do get this table design tab. One or a couple of quick additional things to point out about that. One is one is if that disappears, it probably just means you clicked out of the table. So you can get to it super easily there. The other thing is the settings that you have up here at the top in this table design tab, those settings are specific to the table that you're working in. So if you have a bunch of tables in your workbook, or even on this, or even on this same sheet, changing the settings up here at the top for this table will not change the settings for this table down here. So you want to just keep that in mind. And of course, that can be a little confusing sometimes, but it can also be a benefit because a lot of times you do want to change the settings for the different tables in your workbook separately. So that's why you're seeing that. If you've clicked one of these cells that has some table data in it and you still aren't seeing this table design tab, then you don't actually have a table. So just click and drag from A1 to D24 again, come up on the home tab and click and click format as table and choose your style. Or you can actually go to the insert tab as well and click table right here. That works too. All right. Great question. So that's most of the stuff to say about, oh yeah, let me mention one other thing about tables. You do have some additional things. Remove duplicates is up here. That's really handy, to sort out duplicates only from the table. Convert to range is how you change the table back from being a table to just being regular old cells that are not part of a table. And then you have the name of the table here. If Excel is prompting you for a range of cells, you can also use that table name instead of the range. So rather than saying A1 to D24 or whatever, now mine's D25 since I added the total row. But anyway, instead of saying that, you can just put table 1 in your formula, and that will work exactly the same way. In fact, better sometimes, as we'll talk about very, very soon. Okay, so let's go ahead and make a pivot table. To do that, I'm going to click on this sheet down here at the bottom called order list, and we're going to check out the order list here. Okay, so this order list is a well, it's a long list. There are 1,000 rows of data here, fake orders from fake customers for, from a fake company. And we work for that fake company in this example. So we are, we want to analyze our sales data and try to find patterns, see how we can do things better, call out the top salespeople and so on and so forth. So, if we tried to do that looking at this, the orders are just listed in order number order. So that's not particularly illuminating. And of course, the order numbers are to a certain extent correlated with the date. But of course, if you have more than one order on a single date, then they have similar order numbers, but they're not the same. So looking at this, it's just kind of a really long list. It doesn't do anything. So what we want to do is analyze this information a little bit. To do that, the first thing that we need to do is we need to convert this into a table, just like we did on the other sheet. So I'm going to show you a little trick for this. First of all, make sure that cell A1 up here is selected, but make sure you're not editing it. So if you click on it too many times, you'll get the little blinking cursor here or one up here in the formula bar. You don't want that. If you have that, press escape on your keyboard or click this X next to the formula bar. Either way works, but either one of those two things will stop you from editing the contents of the cell, but the cell will stay selected. Okay, so we could click and drag like we've done so far before. Excuse me, but that would be really tedious. We've got a bunch of columns here, and of course we have 1,001 rows we need to select. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Control on my keyboard and Shift at the same time. If you're on a Mac, maybe it's Command Shift. It could be Option Shift. I'm not 100% sure, to be perfectly honest with you. But Shift should definitely be in there, and you'll probably need to hold something else as well. So I'm going to hit Control Shift on my keyboard, and I'm going to press the right arrow key on my keyboard too. There we go. All right, so that's done. And now I can, and now you'll notice all of row 1 is selected up through column N here. So, I'm selected up to this, so I've got row 1 selected up to where my data ends, basically. Then I'm going to hold Control Shift again and press the down arrow on my keyboard. And that is going to get me, that's going to take me down again to where the data ends on row 1001. So now I should have all of it selected. If for some reason you accidentally click somewhere else or something like that, you can also do it the opposite way. Excuse me, select cell in 1001, hold down Control and Shift, and then hit left arrow and up arrow, and that'll work too. Just want to make sure we have all of these cells selected with data in them. Then what we can do is we can either come up here to the top and click Format as Table and select a style, or again, as I mentioned, we can go to the Insert tab and click Table there. Either way, it's going to give us the Create Table dialog box here. Where's the data for your table? And it should say $A, $1, $in, $1001. If it doesn't say that, Then a third way to get all these, make sure all these cells are inside the table, is just to type this information into the blank right here. That works too. And then I've got a check mark right here. My table has headers. Yes, it does. So I'll click OK. And there we go. Now we've got a nice little table. Again, the color and the style might look different on yours, just depending on what you selected, but it should be something like this. And you should have all of those cells inside of your table. When I do that, of course, again, as we mentioned before, we get the table design tab up at the top here. And what I'm going to do, and we've got all our previous settings that we worked with before, but what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to click on this button that says Summarize with PivotTable. Boop. When I do that, I get the Create Pivot Table dialog box. First of all, I'm being prompted to select a table or range. And this one, when I created it, was automatically named Table 3. That's fine by me. But you know, if this table with the order data is not named that, then you might need to change this. Probably you won't though. So you also have the option too, as it says, use an external data source. So if you're trying to analyze information that's stored in, say, an online database of some sort, things like that, then you can use this selection. But of course, that's way outside the scope of this class. So, so we're not going to go there. And then there's an option, choose where you want the pivot table report to be placed, new worksheet or existing worksheet. It would get terribly confusing if this were on the sheet with anything else in your workbook. So I highly, highly, highly recommend always choosing new worksheet right here. If you choose the existing worksheet, then you're going to have either have a blank worksheet, or you're going to get a little confused as you work with your pivot table to represent your data accurately. And then it says choose whether you want to analyze multiple tables, and there's a checkbox that says add this data to the data model. If you had multiple tables with compatible information, for example, if you had this sheet which contains 2 years worth of sales data, and you had another sheet that contained another 2 years worth of sales data or something like that, then you could use this to analyze, to analyze data from multiple tables at once. But we don't have that situation. We're not doing that. So we can leave that unchecked. I'm going to click OK. And here we are. Okay, so we're on a new sheet that's just called sheet 1, and I'm just going to leave it there because that's fine. I'm going to zoom in a smidge, and I'm actually, to get us some extra sort of real estate here, I'm going to change my settings actually, I don't need to do that. Never mind. Don't worry about it. Okay, cool. So, all right. So now we have our pivot table, but of course it's not doing anything for us yet. We need to make some tweaks to it in order to, well, give us any useful information. So, you'll notice there's a big box over here. It says Pivot Table 1. To build a report, choose fields from the Pivot Table field list. And cell A3 is automatically selected here. Now, don't worry about that for now, but also don't move that selection, because if you do, it's going to cause some confusion. We'll talk about that a little bit later. For now, don't worry about it so much. Excuse me. So let's go ahead and do our first thing with the pivot table. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here in this sidebar that says Pivot Table Fields. The Pivot Table Fields sidebar, the way that works is basically just, well, it's pretty straightforward. Basically, each of these things that we have here, at least for now, is a column over in our table, our order list. So you have order number, date, amount, number of items, street, city, state, or province, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these match up with the columns. Now we're going to get more of these later on. But for now, they just match up quite cleanly with the columns that we have on the other sheet there. So here's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to click on Amount, hold down my mouse button on top of it, and I'm going to drag it down underneath this little, into this little box that says Values above it, and let go of my mouse button. When I do, you'll notice now it says Sum of Amount, and over here it has changed as well. So cell A3 also says Sum of Amount, and then right underneath it, we get an actual numerical value here. 100,253,922.8. So here's what this is. If you look back over on the order list sheet, you'll notice there's an amount here. So this is the amount of revenue that we brought in for each of these orders. In other words, how much did the customer pay for each order, right? So this order cost the customer $11,522.40. This order cost $2,504.40, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, so this is the amount that they paid. Over here, basically what Excel has done is it has taken all of that and stacked it up into one big old pile of money, and the total revenue from all those orders over the 2 years that are covered, which are 2018 and 2019, are $100,253,922.80. So we've already learned something useful from our pivot table by taking basically just one action. And this is a really important thing to zero in on. If there's one thing to remember about pivot tables, because to make this slightly personal, when I first started learning how to use Excel, even when I got pretty good at Excel, I was a little intimidated by pivot tables because they didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I would try playing with them and stuff, and it just didn't seem to work very well. And the reason that it didn't work well for me 9 times out of 10 when I was first starting out was because I didn't understand this one thing that I really, really want you to hear. Whenever you start working with a pivot table, the very first thing you want to do is you want to take a column with some numerical value, and you want to drag it down here into this values area. Because really what a pivot table is doing ultimately is it's taking a big old pile of something you can count, and it's dividing it up into smaller piles based on different criteria. So what we've done here so far, we've just created our big pile. We've taken all the money that we got from those orders over those 2 years or whatever, and we've thrown it into this big old pile of 100 million and some odd dollars. And so now what we can do is we can take that and we can divide it up into smaller piles to try and find different patterns inside of our data. So let's do that. Okay. First thing I want to do is pretty easy. If you look back over in the order list, you'll notice that we have some customers from the United States, and we have some customers from Canada. And so what I want to do is I want to try and find out what proportion of my business comes from the United States and what proportion of my business comes from Canada. To do that, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to find the country field in this list. I'll hold down on it with my mouse button, and I'll drag it over into the columns area. When I do that, I now get a different layout here. I have sum of amount as a row label over here on the left. And then my column labels, I've actually got 3 columns here. I have the Canada column, which has $21,896,448.40. And then I have the US column, which has $78,357,474.40. Then I have a grand total column, which is exactly what I had in my one cell with numbers in it in the previous layout. So what we've done again is we've taken this 100 million and we've divided it up into the US pile and the Canada pile. So that helps us to understand, okay, looking at this, about 4/5 of our business comes from the US and the remaining 1/5 of our business comes from Canada. So that's good to know. If I'm trying to figure out where to allocate my resources, then that could make a big difference in terms of, you know, where do I put salespeople? Maybe, maybe I kind of de-emphasize Canada because they don't seem as interested in our products, or maybe I try to put a little more effort into Canada because it feels like maybe we haven't really cracked that market yet, and and we want to get, we want to pull in some more Canadian customers. So that can really give me some clues as to what I want to do with this. Okay, so let's go ahead and break it down a little bit more. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to find the date field. I'm going to hold down with my mouse button and drag it down underneath where it says rows and let go. And you'll notice that it does something a little different from what we saw the previous two times. So previously, we basically had these fields go almost exactly into these little squares. And no real changes happened there. When I drag it down, when I drag the date down here underneath my rows, though, I actually get more fields than just the date. So you'll notice I also have a years field and a quarters field, even though I don't have years and quarters as a column in my table over here. The reason for that is Excel has looked at this and said, oh, okay, these are dates. I can group these together to make it a little more manageable. Now, if you have an older version of Excel, I believe, I want to say like 2013 and earlier, maybe 2016 even, but 2013 and earlier for sure. If I have those, if I have one of those dates, or excuse me, if I have one of those earlier versions of Excel, then it's not going to do this for me. Instead, it's going to just list out each and every date, like this. I'm going to drag these years and quarters out for a moment. Even then it grouped it. Okay. So, excuse me. Basically, it's going to give you it's going to give you each and every date, January 1st, January 2nd, January 5th, or whatever. I don't know which days actually have orders, but it'll list them out. I notice no orders happen on January 14th, 15th, or 16th. And so it would skip over those in the list over here. But basically, that's kind of how the newer versions of Excel are smart enough to know that that I probably don't want a row for each and every date in my data. And so it groups it together. And it creates these additional fields that I mentioned. So I'm going to drag these back down here like they were before. I'm going to put quarters. Well, okay. If you take a look at this, first of all, before we get into that, if you take a look at this, I just have the date field under rows here. And you'll notice it's treating these as months of the year. So I've got January, February, March, April, May, June, etc. So it's grouped everything that's the same month together. Now, this is a little misleading because if you look at this, this total is actually going to be there are 2 years that are covered in this data set. This is going to be all of the money that we took in Canada in January for both of those years. So January 2018 and January 2019. So it's kind of grouped these together in a way that's a little misleading. But what if we come up here and we add our quarters? Now it's still a little misleading because we have quarters. We have quarters listed here, and And this is the total take in the first quarter in Canada of both 2018 and 2019 again. But now if we add in our years, I'm going to put that on top and make sure, by the way, it says years, quarters, date in here. And we'll talk about why in a moment, but make sure it's in that order. If it's not, drag it around until you get it there. Now we have some pretty useful information. So here we have a 2018. Let's see. Okay, hang on just a sec. So here we have a 2018 and a 2019 row, and we've got Canada and US and a grand total for each of those. So this is the total take from 2018. This is the total take from 2019. This is the total take only in Canada from 2018. This is the total take only from the US in 2018, etc. Okay. So someone's asking, they're not seeing quarters and years on the list. Is there a drop-down box? No worries. Caps lock on happens to the best of us sometimes. No worries. Okay. You'll only see quarters and years up here if you did drag the date underneath rows there. So if you didn't do that yet, then you won't see those. And it should go years, quarters, date. Now, this is assuming that you have a newer version of Excel. Actually, just do you know offhand which version of Excel you have? Do you have Office 365? Okay, cool. Okay, good. So yeah, when you drag up here, you should see at least date. And when you drag this down under rows, you should get years and quarters there too. You might have to scroll down on this to see them. If you're not seeing them right away. Are you seeing them now, or are they just not there yet? Okay, cool. No worries. Let me show you how to do this, because this is a useful thing that the newer versions of Excel kind of oh yeah, no, don't click that more thing. That's something entirely different. So yeah, let me show you how to do this. I'll get to where you are now. Everybody else, if you do have years, quarters, date down there underneath rows, don't follow me on this because you're going to get thrown off. But I do want to show everybody how this works. And Melinda, this hopefully will get you to where we are. So okay, let me get rid of these two first. Oh, also, Melinda, are you seeing like this, January, February, March, or are you seeing individual dates like January 1st and January 2nd over here? Okay, good. That gives me exactly the way to show you. Okay, let's see. All right, give me just a moment. Don't follow me. Don't anybody follow me on this just yet. And then I'll show you how. Yeah, there we go. Okay, good. Okay, so in older versions of Excel, or apparently Melinda's version of Excel that doesn't want to cooperate with her, I'm so sorry that's happening. This is what you get when you drag the date in here. You get each individual date listed out. So what you'll want to do in this situation, or anytime you have something like this where you need it to be in bigger piles, basically. Remember my metaphor of we're taking a big pile of money and we're dividing it up into smaller piles, right? So we had the big pile of all of our revenue, and then we divided it up into the Canada and the US pile. Well, here we've divided it up into a lot of smaller piles. Each date has a Canada pile and a US pile in a grand total. So on the 5th, January 5th, we had $30,512.20 in Canada. $92,947.20 in the US, and then a grand total here. But this is just for that date, January 5th, 2018. So that's not very useful for us. So what we want to do is I want to come over here and I want to click on, right click. So click with the right mouse button, or if you're using a touchpad, tap with 2 fingers. That does the same thing. And you should get this. You should get this drop down, or this context menu here, the little right click menu. And what you want to do is go to this spot where it says group. And when you click on that, you should see, so there's basically little filter options here. That's not, to me, this is a little weird that this is here, but I don't know, whatever. Don't worry about this stuff at the top, because you can do this in a better way somewhere else that I'll show you in a minute. But down here where it says by, now we're talking. What we want to do is we want to make sure that months is selected. And then we also want to click quarters and years so that those are highlighted too. So make sure all 3 of those are highlighted in blue or whatever color it ends up being on your computer, and click OK. And now you should get something like this. And this is actually kind of back to where we were earlier. The only difference is a visual one, which I'll point out to you in a moment. But before I dive into the specifics of that, Melinda, did that get you? Are you seeing this now? Yay, all right, excellent. So, okay, here's what we've got. And this is pretty cool. Okay, we have 3 sets of rows here. And the best way to think of it, I find, is to think of it as rows inside of rows. And that's kind of how Excel treats it. But it is a little confusing because your sheet has rows and then your pivot table has rows. It's a little weird, but hang on for a sec and I think it'll be clearer. So you've got essentially a set of big rows here. There's a big row that's the 2018 row right here. And underneath it are sort of sub rows or like baby rows that have Q1 and then January, February, March, Q2, and then April, May, June, et cetera, et cetera. You have another big row here, which is the 2019 row. And that encompasses, again, we have Q1 and those 3 months, Q2 and those 3 months, et cetera. And then we have one last big row, which is the grand total row down here. So basically, so inside of each year's row is a sub row, which is each quarter. So for Q1, we've got the totals here, and then we have the sort of sub rows, which are months: January row, February row, and March row. And because these are all nested inside each other, we can collapse them. So, excuse me, if I click the little minus sign here next to quarter 1, then it collapses that down. And it also does it for the 2019 quarter 1. And I can do that with the rest of these. And so now what I get is a summary of what my revenue was for each quarter of these 2 years. So I can see, okay, in the US, Q1 in 2018, I had 94,401. Nope, I'm misreading that. $9,440,153.40, and so on. So I can hide those by hitting the little arrow key or the little plus sign, excuse me, or minus sign to collapse and expand them. I can also just get rid of this if I'm like, I don't need to know what the specific monthly numbers were. I just need to know the quarterly numbers. I can come over here to the rows area, click on that date field, which is which represents the months now, and drag it back up. And now it just gets rid of the plus signs the way I had it. So now I don't I don't have those sub rows. I just have the quarterly numbers. Let's see, where's that date field again? I'll drag that back down here. Okay, so one other weird thing, yes, someone's asking, Darcy, can you format by dollars? Absolutely. I'll show you that in just a sec. That's a good question. And we're definitely going to get there because, yeah, that does make it easier. So what we've got here, well, let me show you some of the pivoting that we are talking about here. What I can do is I can shift the order of these rows, and that will change the look of this pretty significantly. So and kind of how it works. So let's say I take the date here and I drag it up above years and quarters and drop it there. It's still under rows, but I've got date, years, quarters. And remember, the date represents our months. So if you look over here, suddenly you'll see I have a lot more big rows. The first big row is the January row, and that one has a 2018 sub row and a 2019 sub row, and then a quarter one sub row underneath that. Now that's kind of useless because each quarter, or because January is always part of Q1. There's no part of January that's not. That's how it works as a quarter. So these numbers are redundant, you'll see there. If I shift the order all the way though, and I put quarters on top, now I've got, well, no, that's just weird. Okay, let's see. There we go. Well, let's put quarters on top, yeah, and date and then years. When I do that, my big rows are quarters. And then each sub row is a month. So I've got January, February, and March. And then each sort of sub row, I've got a 2018 sub row and a 2019 sub row. So if I want to see like, okay, in general, how do I do in Q1? I can look at I can just look at my months and see like, okay, in January, I've done a total here, but I can also expand this out and see, okay, well, how did I do in 2018 versus 2019 and so on and so forth. I could even do it like this. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to drag the years field up to filters right here. When I do that, you'll notice up at the top, I get years all. And what I want to do is click the drop-down arrow next to where it says that, where it says all. And I'm going to click on, for now, 2018 and click OK. When I do, you'll notice now I only have two sets of rows. So I've got the quarters as the big rows, and then I have the months as the sub rows. And because I've got 2018 up in this filters area, this is only going to show me 2018 numbers. Any date that's not 2018, it filters out that entire row of data. So if I look over here on my order list and I scroll down a ways, this one's from 7/6/2019. For now, the way that I have my settings here with my filters in place, basically this order doesn't exist because it's from 2019. That's not reflected over here. None of the 2019 orders are reflected. This only shows me information for 2018. If I click up here again and I choose 2019 this time, then I get all my 2019 numbers and none of the 2018 numbers. So that allows me to look year by year and kind of zoom in on that without the distraction of the additional years worth of data. And I could completely flip this if I want to. So for example, right now under columns, I have the country. And I'm going to drag that over here under rows instead. And then I'm going to take my quarters and drag it to the top of columns, and then date and drag it underneath. And now what I get is for each quarter, I have a column. And then when I hit the plus sign to expand it out, I can see subcolumns for January, February, March, and a quarterly total here. And again, I've still got my filters in place. So these are only the 2019 numbers I'm seeing, not the 2018 numbers. But if I wanted to see all of it, I can click all up here, click OK. And now I've got, and again, this could be misleading or confusing because now that I'm looking at all years, this is the total that's been taken in all Januaries that are in my data set. So, so this is the 2019 and 2018 January total for Canada. So now I have Canada rows and I have date related columns here. So you can kind of flip things around. Let's see. Let me go ahead and I'll drag these quarters out of here for now. Okay, so now I have, and actually I'll flip these back. So I'm going to put date over here under rows and country under columns again. So that makes it a little more readable. So now you should have years in the filters, columns under country, or country under columns, date under rows, and then sum of amount still in the values area. But let's go ahead, Darcy. Now's the perfect time, I think, to circle back to your question, which is, how do I change these to look like actual dollar amounts instead of just a general number with a decimal point? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come down here and click where it says sum, or click the little drop down arrow where it says sum of amount under values. And when I do that, I'm going to come down here and find value field settings. Click. And now I have a couple of different things here. We'll talk about, well, actually, let me show you one other, well, no, let's not do that yet. Okay, so you have value field settings, little dialog box here. I have, and down here at the bottom in the corner, I have number format. I'm going to click that button. And it gives me the format cells dialog box. I'll show you another place you can get to this dialog box in a second because it circles back to something we talked about in part one. But for now, this is our number formatting. Just like we talked about in part one, our number formatting doesn't change the value of numbers in your cells, but it changes how those values are displayed to you. You know, we talked about the date ones, like, and we talked about some of the currency ones and so forth. And obviously, that's what we want. I'm going to click currency over here. All these defaults are fine, so I'll click OK. And then I'm going to click OK one more time. And now you'll notice I get it listed out with dollar amounts, $1,628,980.40. Having those commas there and the dollar signs makes it a little easier to tell exactly what kind of, you know, what's what in terms of your place values and so forth. It looks a little cramped maybe, so I might come back down, value field settings, number format. And I might actually click on accounting because that's going to keep the decimal points aligned, and it's also going to place the dollar sign a little further away from the numbers so that it doesn't get, so it's not as confusing to read. I'll click OK and OK one more time, and now I have dollar sign over here, and then I can see I can read the numbers more clearly, and I don't get the dollar signs mixed up with the numbers, basically. So let's add one more little thing in here. Okay, so actually first I'm going to go up where it says all. I'm going to change this to 2018 and click OK. So now I'm looking at just 2018 numbers again. And you can have multiple layers of filters too. So if I wanted to filter it by years and I wanted to filter it by country or whatever, I could totally do that. But now, okay, so now what I want to do is I want to take a look at our salespeople and see how they're doing. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to find the salesperson field. And I'm going to drag that down into let's say our rows for now. I'm going to drag it into rows on top of date. Of course, I can flip that if I want to, and we'll do that in a second. But for now, let's look at it this way. So it's given me expanded ones at first, but I'm going to go ahead and collapse them by clicking the minus signs. And now I can look at my grand total revenue from each of these salespeople over the course of 2018. So in 2018, Cassius brought in $1,418,568.60 from Canada, and his U.S. orders totaled $836,533 even. So he had a grand total of $5,255,101 or $255,101.60 altogether. So that's a really, so now we can look at this and kind of compare these directly, and we can see, we can break it down by specific months and see how they did in various places over the months. And we could compare that to other people if we expand their stuff out as well. We could also kind of take them head to head based on what month they're working on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the date over here and I'm going to drag it up above salesperson in the rows area. And now I've got and now if I expand January, I can see everybody's January numbers together all in one list. February, here are all their February numbers, and so on and so forth. So I can really get in detail and see how each salesperson is doing over time without having to kind of hold that in my head. I can just look at this and see like, okay, so February looks like there were a few people who didn't have any Canada sales, but, you know, and then I can kind of compare everybody's numbers here and so on and so forth. So the key thing about this really ultimately is with pivot tables, I mean, you can do tons of different things. Oh, right. One other thing I could do to compare these, the different sales folks here, is rather than looking at dollar amounts at all, let's say I just want to know about their volume of sales or the number of orders that they processed. I'm going to come over here one more time, click on the drop down next to sum of amount again, and click value field settings one more time. And this one, rather than going down to number formats, actually I do need to go to number format. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to change this back to general and click OK. And then I'm going to come down here and find count and click OK. What that's going to do is change this from dollar amounts to just the number of orders that each salesperson processed in these different time frames. So in January, Cassius had 1 Canada order and 7 US orders. Delma had 2 US orders, but nothing else. Flannery had 4, Madeline had 6. Ray had 3 orders in Canada and only 2 in the US. Sadira had 9 in the US only. Sean had 1 in Canada and 2 in the US. So we had a grand total of 32 US orders and 5 Canada orders for a total of 37. So rather than go by number, or rather than go by dollar amounts, all it's doing is counting the different rows that match the criteria. So each row that's a US, that's a US order where Flannery is considered to be the salesperson, or, is listed as the salesperson, and it's in January of 2018. Each row that matches up with that gets counted here once. And there were a total of 4 rows that match, that match those criteria. In other words, Flannery processed 4 orders over the course of January 2018 in the US. So again, we're still kind of doing the same thing. We're taking a big pile and we're dividing it up into smaller piles, but rather than say, what are the total dollar amounts, we're like, we now have essentially a pile of orders and we're saying, okay, how many orders here, how many orders there, how many orders at this time, how many orders at that time. And so you can get a lot of information out of your data based on this. And of course, one of the really nice things about this is that your data stays exactly the same. So none of this is going to change. And so you don't have to worry about losing anything. You don't have to worry about, you don't have to worry about doing any calculations and then going to a different sheet to write them down or anything like that. You can just use this to analyze your data and really get in detail with it. A couple other things to mention here about using pivot tables in general. At the top, just like we had with the regular table, at the top, you have this pivot table analyze tab here. And you also have a pivot table design tab over here. Again, those will only show up if you have a cell selected that's inside of the pivot table. And the safest cell to have selected while you're working with pivot tables is cell A3, because that's always inside the pivot table, even if you don't have any filters set up so far. So if that disappears, if those options disappear on you, then just click cell A3 on the sheet that has your pivot table, and you should be good to go. And there are some useful options on this tab as well. So you've got a name. You can rename your pivot table if you want or need to, and you can, of course, refer to it in formulas if you needed to as well. Although that could get pretty complicated if you're planning to change the layout of the pivot table in any way. There are some extra data analysis tools called slicers and timelines that we don't have time to get into, but you can check those out if you're interested. And various other things that relate to the format of your pivot table. But I do want to draw your attention to these two buttons here. There's a refresh button and there's a change data source button. Now, if for some reason we didn't turn this into a table before we made it into a pivot table, then we might need to come up here and use this change data source button. Strictly speaking, you don't have to turn your data into a table before you create a pivot table out of it, but it makes things a lot easier. Because if it's not a table, for one thing, if I add extra data to the table, let's say I added 500 more orders from 2020 or something like that to this list. Then I would have to, if this wasn't a table, I would have to go over here and I would to my pivot table analyze tab, and I would have to click change data source, and I'd have to select all those new cells that had the extra orders in them. And then I would need to click refresh here in order to update the information. If you use a table, though, you can expand you can add the additional data inside the table. So you would just right click, insert table row below, and you could do that a whole bunch, or you can come up here to the table design tab, and I believe somewhere you can add, you could click resize table and you could resize it to encompass those 500 rows super easily. And then once you're working in your pivot table, whoops, wrong sheet again. Once you're working in your pivot table, you can just come up here. Once you've added the data to your table, you just click refresh and you're good to go. So you don't have to worry about using this change data source if you're using a table. Using a table also makes it easier to avoid problems with your data, like, for instance, skipping rows or having blank cells. Usually, if you're going to analyze data with a pivot table, having blank rows and blank cells is kind of a no-no. It's going to throw off the calculations that the pivot table is trying to do. And so you want to fill it in with something. In some cells, you might have to put like not applicable, or if it's a cell that has numerical values, you might need to put a 0 there instead of a blank cell. So when you're setting up for a pivot table, be sure to try and fill in as many blank cells as you can and delete any blank rows that you have, because the pivot table can't cope with them very well. And so that's going to make sure that it calculates your data correctly in the pivot table and that you get a good analysis. And then there's this button that says Pivot Chart. If I click on that, I get basically the same thing that I had before with my when we created a chart week before last. And I can come over here. I can select, you know, a column chart or a line chart or a pie chart or whatever is going to best represent the information that's here in the pivot table. And so if you look at this one, it's going to create a, well, I'll click OK and go with this default clustered column chart. If you look at this, we've got basically, so our legend is showing us here that the blue bars represent Canada orders and the orange bars represent US orders. And our vertical axis here is the total number of orders. And then each little group is a month of the year. And of course, 2018 is still selected since that's the filter that's already on up here. So for 2018, I can see like, okay, so we had really good sales volume in March. Then it kind of went down and then it kind of went up a little bit towards October. So who knows what kind of business we're in. But that kind of gives me some clues as to what's going on there. And so, and you can format this in pretty much all the same ways that you format a regular chart from static data. So if you've analyzed your data in your pivot table and you want to represent that visually for yourself or for someone else that you're giving a presentation to or something, then pivot charts are your tool there for that. Okay, let me click a cell back in the pivot table really quick. The pivot table design tab here allows you to turn subtotals on and off. So you can, like right now we have like, if you look at January, we've got our, it shows us we had 5 total in January and then we had 32 in the US. You could turn that off and just see these raw numbers down here, or rawer numbers. You can turn grand totals on and off. You can change the layout of your pivot table report in various ways. You could add banded rows or banded columns to your pivot table layout. And you can add or remove your column headers and row headers. And of course, you can change your colors here. That's kind of nice. And that is pretty much it for pivot tables and pivot charts. What questions do y'all have for me about that before we move to our last example? Oh, weird. That makes it very cluttered. That's cool. There we go. Microphone decided to take a little dive there for a moment. All right, I don't see any questions so far. So if you're typing, keep typing, and we'll move on to our last example. But we'll circle back for any questions that you send in here in the next little while. Okay. So for our final example, we are going to talk about something a little bit different. We're going to do more, or we're going to talk about one other little piece of formula stuff that I think is really useful. So for this example, we actually have 2 different sheets that we're working off of. One is the sheet called This Year, and one is the sheet next to it called Last Year. So on the This Year sheet, what we're trying to do is we've got some sort of a little get together for our friends. And normally we host it at a hotel. and we all hang out together and stuff. And so and we all sort of get rooms as a group and so forth. And so I've sent out all my invitations to the folks who are coming. What I want to do is kind of have, when they tell me, okay, we're coming this time or whatever, I want to fill in their information on this year, which is the guest list. And, I want to put in their name, and I want to just copy all their information, except for the meal preference and room number. Those are probably going to change. Hopefully this person who is on the all coffee diet is not still doing that. They're probably not in very good health if they're still going with that. So we've got our we've got the folks' names, we've got an address, we've got a phone number, we've got an email address. What we're going to do over here on the this year sheet is I've already put in data validation, just like we saw in part 2. When I click on the drop down arrow, you'll see all the names, and I can just click one to fill it right in. Great. And of course, that keeps me from accidentally making some sort of typo or something like that. So I've already got data validation in this column. You'll notice any of these cells that I click, they have a little drop down arrow where I can select a name. What I want to do here is I want to, when I select a name over in column A, I want column B to automatically fill in their address. I want column C to automatically fill in their phone number, and I want column D to automatically fill in their email address. So to do that, we can use a formula. And that way we save ourselves some work. We can just duplicate the formula on these other rows. And then when we select a name over here, all their information gets filled in, and all we have to fill in is the stuff that may have changed, the meal preference and the room number that they're going to have at the hotel. So let's write the formula. Okay, over here in cell B2, I've got B2 selected there. In cell B2, I'm going to hit the equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula. And I did click in the formula bar again, just like I did before, because it's easier to correct mistakes that way. And then once I hit the equal sign, I'm going to use a new function that we haven't worked with before called Vlookup. Vlookup, all one word. And then I'm going to open my set of parentheses, Shift 9, just like we did before. Okay. Inside of my parentheses, I'm being prompted for my arguments. Now, just a reminder, VLOOKUP like this is what we call a function. It's one of those building blocks of formulas, or if you want to think about it a different way, it's a trick that Excel already knows how to use, like your dog knows how to sit or stay. So the trick that Excel is going to do this time is it's going to look up information for us in another part of the book, the workbook, excuse me. And so it needs a little bit of information in order to be able to do that, obviously. So we're being prompted for that information. Remember, the information inside the parentheses is what we call arguments, the information that Excel is going to work with in order to do the thing that the function is supposed to do. So the 4 arguments that we're being prompted for are lookup value, table array, column index number, and then inside square brackets, so it tells us that it's optional, range lookup. And we're going to talk about what each of those are as we write the formula, and then we're going to talk about it after we finish writing it. So here we go. First, our lookup value. This is going to be the information that Excel is going to try and find a match to. So in this case, that's going to be cell A2 over here, where it says Elamazanders. So I'm going to just type A2. And again, it color codes in blue here in the formula bar, and it color codes in blue down here in the body of the sheet. So I know that I'm pointing to the right cell. Great, A2. That's our lookup value. So we're telling Excel, okay, this cell A2 has something in it. In this case, it's the name Elamazanders. Look for a match to that name, right? The next argument that we're being prompted for is the table array. The table array is going to be basically the group of cells that we're looking in order to find a match for this lookup value, Elma-Zanders. So our table array in this case is going to be those cells on the last year sheet, right? That already have the information laid out. So in order to make that happen, we could start typing something in, but I'm not going to make you do that, and I'm not going to make me do that. Instead, what I'm going to do is come down here to the bottom and click on the last year sheet while I'm still editing the formula. This is key. I still need to have the little blinking cursor up here at the top or in the body of the cell if you're typing it there. Either way, though, I need to have the little blinking cursor. I need to still be working on writing the formula when I do this. When I click the last year sheet, you'll notice it fills it in for me inside of a set of apostrophes. It's using those kind of like quotation marks. So it's got that. It's got the name of the sheet, and then it has an exclamation point. That tells Excel, okay, I'm going to give you a cell or a range of cells, but it's on a different sheet, and this is the name of the sheet. So I'm pointing it over to that last year sheet. Then I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to select cells A2, where it says Andy Wong, down to D11, like so. I'm not going to select columns E and F because, again, that information is going to change. So I'm just going to get A2 to D11 right here. And we're good. So Excel fills it in for me. It's got last year inside of apostrophes, exclamation point, A2 colon D11. So this is the range of cells that are our table array in terms of VLOOKUP. Okay, I'm going to put another comma, and now we moved on to our third argument, column index number. The column index number is basically, okay, so let's walk through what the formula is doing or what the function's doing so far. So on the other sheet, we have Elma-Zanders listed in cell A2, right? Excel is going to try and find a match to that in this range of cells, A2 to D11 on our last year sheet. And so it goes through and it's like, oh, okay, cell A5 here says Elma-Zanders. Now we need to tell it what information to bring back now that it's found a match. And what it's going to do is it's going to count over to a different column, and it's going to bring back the information that's in that column. So in this case, we want the address, 301 Silver Run, here in cell B5. In order to, but we need to just tell it a particular column in our range of cells rather than, because it could be looking for any of these names. So what we're going to do is we're going to count over from the left, 1, 2. So the second column from the left is the one that has the information we need. So my column index number is just 2. Now, just to be very clear, this unfortunately can be a little confusing. Column B is the second column from the left on my sheet here, but I'm not putting 2 because B is the second letter or because B is the second column from the left on the sheet. I'm putting 2 because because this is the second column from the left in my table array, in that set of cells that I just selected back in the last step. So if I had instead selected these cells starting with C2 and going down to F11, and I wanted the email address, I would still put 2 there, because although column D is not the second column of from the left on my sheet, it's the second column from the left in my table array here. So that's a little weird, but that's how it works for whatever reason. Okay, so that's our column index number. Finally, I'm going to hit the comma one more time. And our range lookup, it's actually giving us a little suggestion here. We can either select, or we can either put true or false as the range lookup option. Now, if I don't put anything, it's going to default to true. If I do put something, then it'll go with whichever one I choose. What it's doing is it says true, approximate match. So what it's going to do is if I choose approximate match, it's going to look for something that's it's going to try to look for something that's exact to what I want, but it's also going to, but if it can't find something exact, or if it finds something that it feels like is close first, then it's going to go with something that it feels like is close enough to whatever I'm trying to find a match for. That's unfortunate. It doesn't seem to me like it works very well. And so I don't want it to settle for an approximate match. I want it to look for an exact match. And because I'm using data validation over on the other sheet, I literally can't have a name in there that doesn't actually match up with these names. So it's not going to be a problem. I'm going to choose false. Just going to type that in there, Shift 0 to close my parentheses. And there we have our formula. I'm going to click the little check mark or press enter on my keyboard, and it will take me back to the this year sheet. And sure enough, I get 301 silver run. Now, again, let's look at this really quickly again so that we can know exactly what's happening here. Actually, I'm going to not be editing so that we can look at it more clearly. Okay. So my Vlookup function, the first thing that it needs is our lookup value, the thing that it's finding a match for. So our lookup value, the thing that it's finding a match for, is in A2. In this case, the name Elamazanders. After the comma, I have my table array. That's last year in apostrophes or single quotes, exclamation point, A2 to D11. So that's telling Excel, okay, you're going to look for a match to Elamazanders on the last year sheet in cells A2 to D11. So I'll click last year, come over here, and I've got, and now we're looking in this area. The third argument is 2. That's my column index number. So Excel finds a match for Elamazanders. There it is. And then it counts over 1, 2 to the second column of my table array. Okay, second column on the same row as Elamazanders is 301 silver run. Great. Okay, so now it comes back, now it comes back over here and it fills in 301 silver run on in this cell. So we've given it Elamazanders, it's gone and found a match. If I choose a different name, Sakiko Herod 7356 Blue Sky Pike, and sure enough, that's what I've got over here. Oh, by the way, Alexis on Facebook, thank you too for being here. And then the false here just says if I had Sakiko Herod with 2 Ds or something like that, that we wouldn't settle for that. We need exactly this name. So this is working so far, but we've got a couple problems with it. Let me show you. I'm going to go over here. Now, remember, we've got the little green dot in the corner here. And if we drag that green dot down, it's going to fill in a version of this formula in these other columns that I select there. So you'll notice all of these say NA for not applicable. And of course, that makes sense because there's nothing over here on the left. So if I go over here and I choose Joan Smith, 123 Fake Street, great. If I go over here down a little further and I click on one of these, it still says not applicable on this row. And if you look at the formula, you can see why. So I have A15, that is where my lookup value is, the name that I'm trying to find a match to. And then I have last year in apostrophes, and then I have A15 to D24. When I click over to the last year sheet, A15 to D24 is this range of cells right here. So there's nothing there. There's no way it could find a match, right? So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to rewrite this just slightly. Two ways to do it. First of all, I could add $signs in front of A to D and 11 here. That would sort it out. That's an absolute reference. That would work just fine, like we saw a couple weeks ago. But the other option, of course, is the other option we saw a couple weeks ago. I'm going to go to the last year sheet. I'm going to select these cells, A2 to D11. And I'm going to come up here to the name box, click there, and I'm going to rename this old info, all one word, and press enter on my keyboard. Whoops, not backslash. There we go. And so now I've named this entire range of cells old info. So now when I go back to the this year sheet, if I rewrite this and get rid of all this stuff, the apostrophes, last year, A2 to D11, and I just put old info in there instead. And now I hit the check mark or press enter. That works exactly the same, but if I drag this down again, now I get the right address on this row too. So that's working well. There's one other thing that I'll need to tweak though when I move, or a couple other things I'll need to tweak when I move it over here. You'll notice if I try to autofill it over to the next column by dragging the dot again, I get NA. Here's what's happening. You'll notice that my formula changed again from A2, the name, to B2, the address. So we've got 7356 Blue Sky Pike. So now this cell is looking for a match for this address, right? But I've told it column index number 2 right here. When I click over to the last, whoops, don't edit that. When I click over to the last year sheet, you'll notice column index number 2 is the column where the address is. So I've told it, find a match for the address and then bring me back the address. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So Excel's like, what? So we need to tweak this a little bit. I'm going to change the original formula here. So I'm going to change A2 and just put a $sign in front of that. So we make the column letter absolute. And that means when we copy when we copy versions of the formula, if I drag this down again, then it's going to stay with column A. The A will change, but the row number is allowed to, or the A will stay the same, but the row number is allowed to change. If I drag it over here, then it's still not working the way we want it to, but if you look, that A2 hasn't changed. So this cell is also going to be looking for a match for the name, and that'll help us. All I need to do to make this work on this row though, or in this column though, is to change the 2 to a 3. Because the third column from the left in my table array is where the phone number is. So now I've got that tweaked. I can drag this down, and any of these, it'll find the appropriate phone number. We might have to change the number formatting though to make it look nice. And then one more time, I will drag this one over into column D underneath the email. And of course, A2 stayed the same. So we're still looking for a match for the name. But this time we just need to change the column index number to 4. I'll press enter. And now we get our email address. And this time I'm actually just going to double click on the little dot here because it'll autofill it all the way down until there's nothing next to it. And there we have it. Our formula is working correctly. If we wanted to be real fancy, we could also add the little if to make it not give us this error message if it's a blank cell like we did last week, but we don't have to do that. This works just fine for casual purposes. And that is pretty much it. What questions do y'all have for me here at the end? All right. I don't see any questions so far. If you are typing one, keep typing while we wrap it up. If you think of a question after the fact, you haven't thought of one right now, but you're like, oh man, as soon as the session ends, no worries. Feel free to shoot me an email. You can use the email address digital@cals.org. That's a good way to reach me. This is actually the last of these classes for a couple of months, because I am going to be taking some time to work primarily on the book festival stuff, as I mentioned at the beginning of class, and kind of getting a lot of other sort of virtual programming stuff that needs to be taken care of over the next few months. But we should be picking back up in November, and some of the other programmers are also doing some stuff as well. So keep an eye on the website, and there'll be plenty to do. And of course, you can also check out the YouTube channel. There's tons of classes and stuff on the YouTube channel that I've streamed previously. That's at cals.link/YouTube. And let's see. Other than that, thank you so much for joining me. I know a lot of folks have been here all 4 weeks. That's so awesome. I really appreciate it. Melinda, you're definitely welcome. I love teaching Excel. Is one of my favorite things about my job. Actually, it's just so useful and interesting, and it's one of those things like I said, when I was when I didn't have much experience with it, I was really intimidated by it. But once I learned how to use it, it really opened up a lot of possibilities. It's an extremely useful program, and I hope that y'all will be able to get a lot out of it. Oh, also, I'll pop that link in the chat and everything one more time, to the handouts and the handout and the practice file. If you need handouts or practice files for a previous session at any point, you will also find those basically at the same place. If you look along the right-hand side, you should see kind of an outline, and it'll list all 4 of the sessions. So you can circle back to those and follow along with the videos and really get some good practice in. And of course, you take those handouts, you can print them out and put them next to your desk or whatever you need to do, to have them handy. I hope that you all have a fantastic rest of the day. And it's Monday, so I hope you have a great rest of your week. And hopefully I will see you again at a class in November. Bye, everybody.